Hey guys, Drifter here. Today we're going to be talking about the Chinese problem, which is Chinese government censoring US media through their corporate relations. I'm risking my affiliation with a lot of companies just by having an opinion about this one at all, such as Blizzard with Overwatch, Call of Duty with COD Mobile, Fortnite, since Tencent owns 40% of Epic, if I'm not mistaken. EA has distribution licenses. Just about every major game company has business with China, so this is a little bit of a risky video for me. I hope you guys appreciate that. And I'm sure that by now many of you are aware of the issue of Chinese censorship in American media and corporations. It kind of became a hot button topic this past weekend when a Grandmaster Hearthstone player by the name of Blitzchung used his interview at an official Hearthstone tournament broadcast to give a pro-Hong Kong speech. This led to him being banned, his prize money ceased, and a big political uproar that Blizzard eventually reversed after fans pretty much flamed them into the ground. At almost the same time, one of the owners of the NBA had some very spicy things to say about China, and all the Chinese sponsors pulled out of the NBA, and we all learned that the NBA is about 1/3 funded by China and Chinese companies, which is shocking. South Park did exactly what South Park does. They got mouthy and they got banned, and then they sort of fake apologized and then get banned, and then it even spilled over to Canadian radio. There's a fellow in Vancouver, if I remember correctly, got into a very dicey argument. He was Chinese Vancouver, like first gen, with somebody else saying that you can be Chinese and hold party values but still being Canadian, and that ultimately led to him being fired. And this kind of censorship has been going on for a very long time. Like, this is not a new thing in any capacity, but it's just something that people are noticing now. So today, instead of having a hard opinion or lecturing you or hitting you with some moral imperatives or whatever, I'm going to do my best to try to explain why this is happening, how it began, and what it could mean for our future. One of the best places to start is comparing the US open market to the Chinese closed market. In the United States, we have a very capitalist and pro-business sort of market, and government and society for that matter. We have limited licensing, limited restrictions on business setup and distributions, less taxes, oddly, than a lot of places, depending on how you structure your business, I'll give it that, and overall less government involvement compared to other systems. It's sort of a libertarian wet dream in many cases. Most importantly for this discussion, however, is that our markets are generally open to international products. We don't artificially restrict international products as long as they meet American safety standards. So say if a Peruvian company wanted to start selling new products in the US, they could easily start importing and selling them with few restrictions, or they could set up distribution centers, or just literally start a new business in the US with very little trouble. Comparatively, China's market is closed, meaning that the government determines more who can and cannot do business, especially when it comes to foreigners. Historically, this has been to protect Chinese businesses from outside predatory companies just deciding to sweep in and crush them with money before anything gets developed, because it's part of a longer plan to reinvest their manufacturing money. I think most of us living in the Western world are aware that China manufactures just about everything that we use. I mean, even most of my electronics here are American brands, but I guarantee you they were manufactured in China. But China didn't just want to be a place for us to like dump all of our products in pollution and just take the money out and then leave, and the money that we make from them will just flood the Chinese market with our cheap crap and take over. No, the Chinese government had a very different plan, and that was to limit outside businesses working inside their country so that they could build up Chinese brands and build up Chinese innovation and have a proper Chinese industry. It's a very long-term plan. Therefore, China's government, the government of China, I should say, is very protective of its new industries, and most Western businesses cannot sell directly in that country. In order to sell a foreign product in China, a foreign investor would need to, one, directly invest into the country via manufacturing or creating an entirely new subsidiary that operates under Chinese rules, which is a real proper like physical investment into the country, or two, and this is the most popular one, partner with a Chinese firm and give them distribution rights. In the case of COD Mobile, for example, that in the United States, it's a Chinese firm that's partnered with an American firm just for the distribution rights, because Activision could not sell in China without the partnership with Tencent. This is true not only of software, but just about any other type of product in the country. So that same Peruvian company that perhaps wanted to sell their goods in China could not do so directly unless they wanted to invest in China directly, or unless they wanted to partner with a Chinese company, which would give China some control over them. Many Western companies have been reticent in the last few years to do this, the partnership that is. And historically, Chinese firms kind of steal patents and underpay and have questionable accounting. You should try enforcing patent laws in China. It's like the Wild West. It doesn't matter, especially if it's like a Western company suing a local Chinese person, it's going nowhere fast. That's why, funny enough, big Chinese international firms actually sue each other here in America, because this is the only country that will really enforce the patents and enforce payouts. However, a lot of this is changing. A lot of the Western reluctance to get involved with Chinese business is changing for reasons that we're about to get into. Well, we'll get into them after I explain one more thing about the market. China has market controls, whereas the US is more of a free market. Chinese markets generally run like US markets, as free as possible, as long as they're running in the same direction as the Chinese Communist Party goals. If you step outside party goals, you're going to get a spanking. And the CCP, or the government, since it's a single party state, will step in to protect its long-term plans. The long-term plans are the most important thing for them. That's why you see very selective licenses, you see keeping the currency low to maximize outside investment, and a lot of companies losing their licenses are facing ridiculous fines and people committing suicide when they disrupt business. Many Chinese businesses are also more beholden to the government than the United States because they could have one of three things. Number one is an exclusive monopoly granted to them by the government for some product. Number two is an absurd amount of subsidies or tax breaks or funding to the point where they might as well have an exclusive monopoly because nobody can beat them on price. Or number three, it could be that the party was founded by high-ranking party members or children or relatives of high-ranking party members. So compared to the US, there's much less distinction between a corporation and government. There is, to be clear, still a distinction, but there's less distinction. It's a little bit blurrier. And yes, I do know that US companies work with the US government and other Western governments, and they spy on us, and they do questionably illegal things. Sometimes they get strong-armed, sometimes they get sued, sometimes the government buys out companies. But this will vary company by company, and at least for the most part, they're legally able to say no and put up a strong fight based on constitutional rights. In China, that's not really a thing. For a very long time, none of this mattered to any Western power because the Chinese market was worthless. It was the place that had the most poor people that could manufacture the stuff for the cheapest. However, part of the long-term plan of the Communist Party was to grow the middle class. That's been one of their biggest goals in a long time. They wanted a right, proper middle class because the middle class in most democracies and even capitalist societies that aren't so democratic like China is the one that holds the most power and the most spending power. They're the best to market to, and they want a big middle class so they can be number one. They want to be the new America. They want to be the biggest superpower in the world. And whatever they did, it worked. The growth of the middle class in China has been ridiculous. It's outstripped just about anything else anywhere in the world. And now China has a booming and wealthy middle class that is ready to spend not only on Chinese products, but Western products that are viewed as foreign, fancy, kind of like how we would view French or Japanese things. So China is no longer just the place where you go dump manufacturing of trinkets and cheap stuff. They also have the world's largest and soon-to-be most valuable consumer market. So every company in the world right now is planning to sell goods to China to increase their overall profits. So in many cases, they're planning complementary goods, and when they're building things, instead of just building them for America, they have to make sure that it's also good to go in China. And because of how competition works in stocks and corporate buyouts and yada yada, you have to keep up or your business goes under. So very soon it's going to be you absolutely have to please the Chinese market and do business in the Chinese market to succeed, or your competitors are just going to kill you. A lot of movies are like that too, especially the big budget Marvel movies, the superhero ones and Disney ones. They are make or break on Chinese market. Like they'll just say, we'll get like 75% of our money back with America, and we need to do good in China to kind of hit that profit region, which is kind of spooky, and that's why you see censorship in those kind of movies. And we're getting to the actual censorship thing, I assure you. But the point of this is that China has massive spending power, and it will outstrip the US at some point in the future. Currently, because of all these things, there's a major trade imbalance between the United States and China. That's why President Trump, in one of the very few things that I agree with him on policy-wise, is attempting to change our trade relationship. Personally, I think that the issues preventing his trade war from being successful are that he's over-focusing on tariffs when they were never really the issue, and that he should focus on market access and begin to restrict market access for Chinese firms similar to how they do for us, tit for tat, and force their market to open up. He also has no clear goals, no clear demands, just a lot of change it until I think it's good enough. The same thing happened with negotiations with Mexico. When you're negotiating, you have to have a baseline. You have to have clear goals and exchanges and stuff, and the sort of please me or go away, very, very poor negotiating tactic in my opinion, but that's my political stuff for the day. The point of it is, though, that a trade war or balance or change, a big shakeup, a new epoch is coming because the status quo of Chinese companies selling in the United States with little to no financial restrictions, but being majorly restricted for U.S. distribution to China cannot last. And now we're finally moving into censorship of media. This is not a new thing. This is actually an old thing, but it will become increasingly prevalent in the future. If you watch a lot of movies, you may have noticed in the last couple of years a big increase in Chinese influence in films. For example, Kong Skull Island had a very prominently Chinese character because it was a Tencent production, and this is a time where the United States was waging a proxy war against China in Vietnam, and Vietnam was being supplied by Chinese weapons. So needless to say, Vietnam soldiers, vets, would not allow a Chinese person on any mission whatsoever. That would have not flown at all, but it was put in there to appease the audiences. Or, for instance, going to Shanghai instead of Looper for any Western city and showing off the best parts of Shanghai as sort of a look, we're modern sort of thing. In Doctor Strange, he no longer goes to Tibet. Instead, he goes to Western China, Tibetan region, because the censors in China would not allow him to, Marvel, to write just Tibet, right? And all of these films will also have a general lack of criticism against anything Chinese whatsoever, and there's even like big, nearly all Chinese movies. Pacific Rim Uprising comes to mind. That was one of the most Chinese movies that I've seen in a very long time in American cinemas. This is because in order to distribute your film in a Chinese market, you need to create your films in a way that appeals to Chinese censors, having Chinese characters, having Chinese cities, Chinese-centric plot points, and Communist Party-approved messaging is all a very easy and fast path to get your film on track for approval. China, unlike the United States, does not have unlimited freedom of speech laws and or religion or a lot of things. Their media is very literally censored for a whole variety of things, including, but not limited to, party-preferred news, loyalty to the party, religious references, plots that are against party values and dramas, very, very strict drug laws. China, because of generally British and the Dutch East India Company selling them opium and destroying their population and leading to the Century of Humiliation, which is, I could do a whole different video on that, but because the British pumped opium into China to just ruin people's lives, it created a really ridiculously strict set of drug laws there. Tattoos are often taboo, ghosts, skeletons, a lot of things that fall under supernatural is not in line with party values. Time travel too, because you can't unmake decisions. Little to no criticism of the government or police or anything like that. And the most famous example would be comparing the president, I'm going to try to say this right, Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh. I don't know why he hates this in particular, but he hates being compared to Winnie the Pooh. So that has become illegal as well, because you can't really criticize the government. A Western company that wants to sell products in the lucrative Chinese market and appeal to the broad Chinese middle class, many of which support their government because it took them from poverty to middle class in less than a generation, must obey these guidelines to adhere to government regulation and just so that anybody will care enough to buy the goods. And I gotta let you know that US corporations do not care about values, freedoms, or politics. Despite what you may hear on YouTube about conservative censorship, I promise you 100,000,000% to the bottom of my soul, I am confident that that is a financial issue because they don't want left-wing people to boycott, because that's what they tend to do. Corporations exist literally only to make money via any means necessary. And I'm going to quote a very a wise person here who helped create the super offensive shirt that I'm wearing today. He said, "It's big money salvia, not big morality salvia." And the same thing kind of applies to any company. So for instance, Blizzard, since we're mostly focusing on them today, it's big money Blizzard, not big morality Blizzard. Blizzard doesn't exist for morals. Blizzard exists to make money, and they're going to make money off the Chinese citizens, regardless of what the morals are. U.S. companies have for years now begun to create media that appeals to, or at least is inoffensive to, Chinese censors so that they can sell in both markets. The only recent change in this is that now Chinese markets, government, companies, whatever you want to call it, since again there's less distinction, are now more sensitive to individuals. Individuals inside of a creative team or corporation or like the NBA can't step outside and criticize the party or the people or anything about China outside of their business and have it be okay. It affects the business too. Stepping outside of these lines is punished by Chinese censors or government officials not allowing you to do business in China, companies pulling out, withdrawing, and generally no support from the populace either, which ultimately trickles down to people like me and you. Your media will be largely Chinese government approved. If it's anything of even a modest budget that gets any international distribution, I guarantee you it's gone through the Chinese censor approval process. Working my way toward the end now, I wanted to talk about Chinese versus American values. There are Chinese traditional values, which are mostly dead now thanks to the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution and the vast increase in wealth and many things. However, very old, ancient Chinese values do still exist, at least in some form, in Singapore, which I've been to, lovely place, Hong Kong, and a few other more remote regions of China itself. What you've more got these days is the Communist Party of China values. And the Communist Party of China is sort of a weird marriage between Marxist socialism and barren capitalism. It's essentially operating under the belief that capitalism is the first stage of communism and that it will eventually fail and it will turn into good, proper communism. But until then, let's make as much money as we can and increase the standard of living for our citizens and become a first world nation and do a lot of other good things. And it's pretty much barren capitalism, which means anything goes until something goes wrong and then the government steps in. Religion generally discouraged, spiritual beliefs, stuff like that. You can't be in the party if you're religious. It's a single party state, so if you want your vote to count or to do anything political, you need to be in the party. Being a party member is preferential for just about everything in life in China. And the people, not just the government, but the people in the region, value stability. They value continued economic growth, and they value continue increasing the size and wealth of their middle class. And really just all citizens, even the poorer people in China, are better off now than they were many years ago. And they want China to be the best place in the world by any means necessary. Anything that gets in the way of stability, of peace, of progress, is going to get mowed down for the greater good. They also tend to think very long-term. This is the opposite of the US. These things that are going on here today have been at least vaguely or tentatively planned many decades before. American values, on the other hand, are nearly the polar opposite. We value mavericks, we value outlaws, we value rule breakers, rough guys, cowboys, that sort of stuff. We value our free speech to say any and everything we want, to criticize the president as harshly as possible up to making actual threats of physical harm. We value our freedom of religion. We can believe or not believe in anything as we see fit, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. We believe generally that protest is good, and this is true of both sides of our political spectrum, regardless of whoever you see criticizing a protest for. I guarantee you that same group has a protest or a rally or something on their side that's good. So we do value protest. I assure you China does not. We are, as a nation, strongly religious, one of the most religious Western powers still around. We value, business-wise, chaotic destruction and rebuilding of our markets. Our legends and heroes are the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, the Jeff Bezos that come in with a hammer and just smash industries to pieces and build something totally radically new and better out of them. But we do value that instability because we believe that good things come from it. And because of many things here in the US, we also have a very short-term way of thinking. We think next month, next quarter, next year. A presidential cycle is 4 years. It's very short compared to a lot of other places, especially China, now that they have lifetime president. We have very short-term, what is the next step kind of focused thought, and we don't do long-term. So as you can see, general broad spectrum values between the government and the people of both of these countries are very different. The conflict comes because these two polar opposite value systems are colliding in the corporate world. Neither government, neither the government of China nor the government of the United States, is even remotely interested in war because it will greatly set back both of their different economic goals. Our relationship would have to get ridiculously bad before anybody even realistically considered a war. So anybody that's telling you we're going to go to war with China, that's just fear-mongering. Nobody wants that. What we will be doing, though, is we will be fighting a cultural war. United States has been a bastion of culture, exporting culture around the world, primarily through Hollywood movies for a very long time. And that's one of the reasons the US government hasn't really cracked down on Hollywood accounting, which is a way that most Hollywood companies avoid paying taxes and paying profit shares with other people. So, in the future, if they're appealing to the communist government of China, then we might actually enforce some of those tax rules upon them. But the battle is going to be fought with money. The culture war is going to be fought between US companies, between US citizens and their spending power versus Chinese citizens and their spending power. And neither government is going to do a single thing. Again, both value stability, actually. They're not going to budge in that direction. So our cultural clashes are going to come from business decisions, from media decisions, and from consumer spending decisions. That's the only vote that's going to count in this upcoming battle, if you want to call it that. So moving forward, these are things that for which I am not smart enough to come up with a clear or great solution. I am not going to promise you that I'm a genius and that I can fix this overnight and that there's one clear thing we do or don't have to do. That's just the situation as I understand it. And now that you understand it better, you can make your own decisions about what to do moving forward. Guys, that's all for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.